Hi everyone, this is Shelby from Tucson CSA, and today we're going to make 4 different kinds of seasonal tartines. Tartines are really just a French word for an open-faced sandwich. So essentially it's a piece of toast that's been darkly toasted or lightly if you prefer that, with some olive oil, and then rubbed with a clove of garlic and topped with whichever ingredients you have on hand. I'm getting my inspiration today from a book called An Everlasting Meal by Tamar Adler. This is a book that I really enjoyed because it gives you a lot of ideas for cooking with seasonal ingredients, but also for cooking without a recipe. And so the recipes that I show you today are really less of recipes and more of suggestions. You can alter them based on your preferences or what you have on hand. And so, yeah, I just want to encourage you to really take this as more of inspiration and an idea and bring it into your own kitchen. So I'm going to start by preheating a cast iron skillet on my stove here. I'm going to heat that over medium heat. You can also toast your tartines under a broiler or even in a toaster oven if you have one of those. And then we'll start preparing our tartines by preparing the bread to be toasted. So I've got here 4 slices of Barrio Bread's pain au levain, and you really do want to choose a heartier bread for these tartines because they have to hold a lot of ingredients, some of which might have liquid in them. So you want to make sure that they're sturdy enough that they won't fall apart completely when you go to eat them. So I'm going to liberally drizzle these with olive oil. And then sprinkle them with a little bit of salt. And now that they're prepared, I'll go ahead and put them olive oil face down in my cast iron skillet. So while those are toasting in our pan, we'll go ahead and start to prepare our garlicky greens tartine. And for that, we're going to be using kale. One of the great things about this tartine is that you can use a wide variety of different greens. As you might know, if you're a longtime CSA member, we get a lot of greens in the wintertime. And so this is a great way to use everything from kale to Swiss chard to beet greens to turnip greens. I've used even Napa cabbage in this recipe and it turned out really well. So it's a good way to use up a decent amount of greens because they really do cook down on the stove. So I've got these, which I washed in a big bowl full of water and just kind of shook dry a little bit, but they don't have to be completely dry. And then we'll want to take out the large stem that goes down the middle here. And the way that I most frequently do this is just to use my fingers and kind of move them up the stem until you get the green. We'll put those stems aside. And now to chop the greens, you can kind of try your best to roll them into a small ball, just so that they're compacted together and they're not, moving across your cutting board as you're trying to cut them. And then take a big knife and very carefully go about chopping them. And this can really be a rough chop. You don't need to have anything too precise or, cut any kind of ribbons or anything. But you do want to make sure that the pieces of kale are easy enough to chew and don't make it too awkward to eat. So that's our chopped kale. What I'll go ahead and do next to prepare this is I will actually saute some garlic, 1 clove of garlic that's been chopped, along with a few pinches of red pepper flakes and about a tablespoon of olive oil on a skillet. And then add these greens and just saute them for a few minutes until they've wilted down. And they should look like this when all is said and done. Very fragrant. The garlic really gives them a nice spicy flavor. So I'll go ahead and put these greens to the side since we won't be cooking them today. And I'm just gonna go ahead and go over to my pan to see how my bread is doing. All right, so the bread is still toasting. So we're gonna go ahead and prepare the topping for our broccoli stem tartine. And this is a really great one because it uses the stems of the broccoli, which oftentimes get thrown away or composted or maybe given to the dog if you have one of those. So we're going to use the broccoli stems, which oftentimes end up being sweeter than the florets, even though we see the florets in recipes a lot more than the stems. So to begin, what I'm going to do is I've got my paring knife here, and I'm just going to carefully cut off the broccoli florets, and I'll put them in a bowl to save for another recipe. If you've already used the florets on your broccoli, you might just have the stem waiting for you in the fridge, in which case you have a little bit less work to do. The other part of broccoli that's edible are these leafy greens here. So these are very much like a dark wintergreen, a collard, and they're very delicious. So I'm gonna cut those off and save them to put in a soup or maybe even on another tartine. And I can smell that bread getting nice and toasty. All right, so now that we've got this broccoli stem pared down, we're gonna go ahead and peel the exterior just very lightly. This isn't something that you have to do, but oftentimes the skin on the exterior of the stem can be a little bit tough and just more difficult to bite through. And because we're eating this on a piece of bread as opposed to like in a soup or something that would cook down a little bit more, we want it to be nice and tender. You don't have to be fastidious about this. Just try to get as much of the outside as you can, and if you leave some skin, no problem. And I'll just move these to my work bowl over here. And now we're going to slice this into slices that are about 1/2 inch thick. And really quickly, I'm gonna check on my tartines because I can smell them. Oh yeah. Right. So I just flip them so that the other side will get nice and toasted, and we'll get back to slicing our broccoli here. And I'm going to put the very bottom of the stem into my compost because it's a little bit tough and has dried up. So this is what the pieces will look like. And to cook these, you'll just put them in a small skillet with just enough water to cover them, about a teaspoon of olive oil, and then a few big pinches of salt so that they get nice and salty from the start. And you'll simmer them for about 5 minutes or so until they're nice and tender, and you'll drain them and put them in a bowl. Now, what Tamar Adler says is to save that broccoli cooking water to use as the basis for another recipe. So you could cook greens in it, you could use it as a broth in a soup. So make sure that you save that instead of throwing it away, and it'll kind of give life to a new meal after your tartine. All right, so I think our bread is done toasting, and I'm going to grab that right now for us. So you can see here we've got some nice charred spots. If you like to use your grill a lot, this would be a really great thing to do on your grill. Could get some nice char lines on it. So the thing that you want to do immediately after you toast your bread for the tartines is rub each piece of bread with a clove of garlic. So I've got mine here, it's been peeled. And you'll notice that the garlic kind of just melts into the bread. Don't be afraid, you can rub it in there pretty hard. And this just gives the bread a nice garlicky basis on which to put all of your other ingredients. Tamar Adler talks about cooking with economy and grace, and that doesn't mean having the most expensive ingredients, all of the different kinds of cheeses in your fridge or whatnot. It really just means, making do with what you have, and maybe having a few really good key ingredients like olive oil and bread that you can use as a basis for a lot of other more humble ingredients. And that's really what a tartine is. So I'll go ahead and just put these to the side now that they've been rubbed with garlic. And we'll continue on with our broccoli. So these are broccoli stems that I have already cooked. They're in this bowl here, they're nice and fork tender, and they're ready to be put onto a tartine. So what I'll do is just take my spoon, I'll ladle those on there. Whoops. Eating these might be a little bit of a messy endeavor, but that's okay. Part of the fun of eating with your hands. Okay. So now that the broccoli stems are on there, I'm going to take that good olive oil that I have and be pretty liberal about dressing it. And then I'm also going to put on a little bit of flaky Maldon sea salt. I think this is a really great addition to a lot of different tartines or as a topping for many different recipes. So I'll put that on. I'll top it with some freshly cracked pepper. And then the last thing that's going on here is just a few bits of shaved Parmesan. And I know that there are fancier tools for shaving Parmesan. It's not my kitchen peeler, but this happens to work just fine. I lost one, there we go. All right. So our broccoli tartine is done, and we're gonna go ahead and move on to our greens that we were talking about before. So again, I have my bowl here of sauteed kale, which I've sauteed in a little bit of olive oil with some garlic and red pepper flakes. And you could absolutely leave the red pepper flakes out if you or someone in your family doesn't like spice. I'm gonna go ahead and just pile that on. Tartines are one of those things that kind of leave you with a little bit of scraps after you eat them. So you might have a little salad at the on your plate at the end of it. But luckily you're starting with some really delicious ingredients, and that's okay. So after you piled on those greens, go ahead and find my feta here. I've got some Fior Capra feta. This is from one of the farms that we work with, located in Pomerene, Arizona. And they're just run by a really lovely family who really, really enjoys their goats and happens to make really wonderful goat cheese, including this feta, with the milk that they produce. So you can be as liberal or as scarce with the feta as you want. All right. So we've got 2 down, 2 to go. The next tartine that we'll be making is a roasted winter squash tartine. I think that because Farmer Frank's sweet potatoes are so good, you could actually make this with one of his roasted sweet potatoes if you didn't have winter squash on hand. I happen to have had, I believe it's called a honey butter. Nope, that's not right. I can't remember the name, but it was a really cute little winter squash, very sweet and starchy, like a butternut inside. And so I roasted this yesterday, and I'm just gonna scoop out the flesh from the inside of the skin and place that in a bowl. So you'll probably want about 1/2 of a cup of roasted squash. And tartines are really great for things that you might have already cooked earlier in the week or for a different meal, and just want to kind of repurpose and give new life to. So this was something that I had actually roasted for a different recipe and happened to have in my fridge. And here we are making it into something entirely different. Okay, so we've got our squash in there, and we're gonna go ahead and add about a tablespoon of grated Parmesan. A good pinch of sea salt, freshly ground black pepper, and then a good drizzle of olive oil. And what I'll go ahead and do is just take a spoon and kind of mash that all up together. And you can make it as, thick or pureed as you prefer. A little piece of skin in there. So once that's all been combined, we'll add it to one of our blank tartines. And just spread it out as evenly as you can. No need to aim for perfection here. And then we're gonna go ahead and squeeze a little bit of lemon juice on that. Drizzle a little more olive oil. And then you can top it with some toasted nuts or seeds. I've got some toasted pepitas here. And they just add a really nice crunch because the squash is really mostly pureed. They're really great to have on there. All right, so our squash tartine has been finished. And the last tartine we're going to make today is one that is very classic in France and in French cooking, and that is the butter and radish tartine. So this is very, very simple. What you're going to do is just take a few radishes that have been washed and you'll slice them thinly. And you want just enough that will be able to cover the surface of the bread in one thin layer. So that looks to be good. And what I've got here is a big pat of Kerrygold butter. It is great to use a good yummy grass-fed butter because you can really taste it on this tartine. So I've got my last blank tartine here, and I'm gonna layer it real thick. This is really just a 3-ingredient tartine, so you can really go heavy on the butter. I think the French would be proud. And then you can go ahead and just start to add those sliced radishes on top of the butter. There you go. And we'll top this with a little bit of that flaky sea salt. And that about does it for our tartines. So this makes a really great dinner, especially with a salad on the side or anything on the side. But you could also have it for lunch or a light breakfast or a snack. And yeah, I hope that you take your own liberties in your kitchen and make a tartine that really speaks to you and what you have in your fridge. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.